And then a specific thing or something that is special about this teacher from Taiwan, we call Master Shi. He said very clearly, if you want to be a Gongfu teacher, you have to know the medicine. If you don't know the medicine, you're only half a teacher. And then he taught a very distinct, clear system of Chinese medicine that was based on what we would call Tuina, manual medicine, trauma medicine, the things that you need to look after students who are practicing martial arts.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. I've seen messages lately on social media streams that equate hustling and working hard as a sign of trauma, that pushing yourself is pathological, that your unresolved trauma is the motive force behind your extraordinary efforts. Maybe it's so. That said, unless you've got another source of funding besides your own wallet, if you want to get a practice up and stable, then hustle, it's involved. Yeah, that means pulling out the notepad or computer at 3:47 a.m. when you wake up with an idea for the blog post that reaches your target audience and write the damn thing out. You won't be going to sleep anyway, so best to make use of the muse while she's shouting into your ear. Concerned about your finances and not sure how to make it all work? Then sit down with a spreadsheet and work out where the money's coming from and where it's going. Yes, you might be bleeding red ink, but at least you know the landscape of your troubles. It's better, way better, to know the trouble that you got, because then you can do something productive about it. Not sure how to approach this kind of financial reckoning? Hire an accountant or have a chat with GPT. This stuff isn't rocket science. It's business 101, and you need to know the business basics that all businesses share in common if you want to have yourself a successful practice. While you're at it, maybe list out the attitudes that have cast money or financial success into a bad light. It's hard, impossible, I would say, to get what you want when you're conflicted about what it is that you want. I know this is going to sound old-fashioned and a bit out of step with the current vibe tone, but you're going to have to work long and hard. The muse, the genius, the spirit of the universe, whatever you would like to name it, it likes to see you desire. It wants to see you sweat. It loves it when it throws up a barrier and you swat it away with a bit of Gongfu. This thing about work-life balance, guess what? That's not for the self-employed who are just starting out. Look, if you're working 36 hours a week for someone else, then fair enough. At the end of the day, you're done. But if you're running the business, guess what? You'll fail without the hustle. And yeah, that should cause a queasy feeling in the pit of your stomach. If you think that you're entitled to success because you have an advanced degree, guess what? That degree entitles you to the difficult work of figuring out how to apply the skills and knowledge that you have. I know it's harsh and perhaps the rantings of an ancient boomer, but when I look at my life, when I look at my parents' life and my grandparents before that, who started a business in the damn Depression, there is no success without hard work. If you're looking to create a business that sustains you, here's something else they didn't tell you. It's going to take quite a bit more than you imagined. Which doesn't mean that you're wrong about things. It's that most endeavors take a lot more to get up and running than you planned on. I suspect it's actually important that at the beginning, you've got no idea how hard it will be. Because if you did, you wouldn't begin. But you do need to start and shake it. And as we say here in Missouri, get it. Get her done. That is some redneck wisdom that I promise you can take to the bank. Learning medicine is not simply a set of skills that you learn in class and then absorb in clinical shifts as an intern. Learning medicine will eventually take you down pathways you did not expect to travel. It will have you sitting in rooms with people that you'd not seek out in your ordinary life. It will surprise you with questions you didn't think that you'd find interesting. Ethan Murchie, the guest of this conversation, started off with martial arts and then found the Nei Jing to be useful in explaining what the physical training was doing to his body and mind. Yes, the paths with medicine can be surprising. It can not only take you to foreign lands, but unexplored aspects of yourself as well. In this conversation, you'll get another take on the Nei Jing and another perspective on learning medicine. Let's get started. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. You have clinic challenges, our sponsors have solutions. Are you licensed in California and want to get on the best paying insurance rolls? AccuCare has been helping acupuncturists do that for over 30 years. One of the foundations of a smooth running clinic is having a supplier that you can rely on. Blue Poppy is your trusted source, and you can get free shipping. Mayway helps you to navigate the autumn season of change with information from their podcast and newsletter and with quality herbs. Later in the show, you'll hear about how Jane's AI scribe frees you from writing clinic notes and why golden flower Chinese herbs is old-fashioned enough not to use an automated answering system. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers that our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Are you a California licensed acupuncturist who accepts insurance or wants to? Are you satisfied with your current reimbursements? You could be earning more. With the right support, joining top insurance networks such as Cigna is simple. AccuCare was started 30 years ago by acupuncturists for acupuncturists. AccuCare has already negotiated top reimbursement rates for acupuncturists. With AccuCare, you'll spend more time with patients and less time battling insurance paperwork. Email AccuCare@AccuCare.com and let them help you get in-network with Cigna and other well-paying companies. Get paid what you deserve. Email AccuCare@AccuCare.com and save $100 on your credentialing application fee. Use the code PROSPER. That discount code again, PROSPER. Contact AccuCare@AccuCare.com to get higher reimbursement rates and a credentialing company you can trust. Running a smooth, efficient clinic starts with the right supplier, and that's where Blue Poppy comes in. From premium acupuncture needles to trusted herbal formulas, Blue Poppy supports your practice with products that you can count on. That includes their Classics line, featuring over 40 of the most popular traditional Chinese medicine patents, now available in convenient capsule form. Starting October 1st, you can save 15% on the entire Classics line. Perfect for restocking your clinical essentials. Even better, Blue Poppy offers free shipping on all orders over $50 with no restrictions in the continental U.S. For nearly 40 years, Blue Poppy has been a trusted partner to licensed acupuncturists, known for high-quality products and outstanding service. Visit BluePoppy.com today to see why so many practitioners rely on Blue Poppy. And don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and updates.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. Autumn is a season of change, both in terms of weather and health, and this month at Mayway, we're focused on helping you support your patients through this challenging transition. In our newsletter and in our podcast Chinese Medicine Matters, we'll feature classic formulas for wind-related conditions, highlight traditional festivals like the Mid-Autumn and Double Ninth celebrations, and share product deep dives to help you choose the best formulas for your patients during this time of year. Since 1969, Mayway Herbs has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. Our Plum Flower brand line includes pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs. And along with educational resources, articles, and videos, we're here to help you provide the very best patient care. Please visit us at mayway.com to explore more. Deep thanks, as always, for your support. And here's to cultivating healthy resilience with the wisdom of real Chinese medicine.
Ethan Murchie, welcome to Geological.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
I'm happy to have you join me. It's always fun to talk about Chinese medicine.
Well, yeah, it is. And as I've been telling you, I'm excited just to be here with you and take part in this grand conversation that you're creating with your podcast. It's really quite nice.
It is kind of a grand conversation. It's like coming up on 9 years. Yeah, I can remember being a student, and one of my favorite things was hanging out with my classmates, trying to puzzle out what the hell this stuff was that we were studying, and how to use it, and how to think about it, and what it just might be. That was my favorite part. What the hell is this?
Yeah, I can relate. I can definitely relate. Like conversing about concepts that stretch your imagination or stretch your conception of things is definitely one of the best parts of what we're doing.
Oh, for sure. And if you want to stretch your imagination, if you want to stretch like the fabric of how you put the world together, man, Chinese medicine will muck you up in really delightful ways.
This is also consistent with my experience, although I find that at this point, I've kind of been immersed in it for so long that I no longer notice this effect as much. I see other people kind of going through it, but I can't relate anymore. I have kind of like permanently warped my mind, I think.
You know, it's like training in anything. When you first start doing something, you notice how you're not limber, or you can't make the moves, or you just can't quite get the motion to work right. So you notice everywhere where you get stuck, and then gradually you train through those. Things become smoother, and then it just kind of flows.
Well, yeah, and my experience has been that I've noticed something different seems to be between my experience and a lot of people's experiences, which is that I came to everything originally through Tai Chi Chuan, but then through Gongfu generally, and from Gongfu into doing Tuina, like a lot of structural therapy type things. And so a lot of the concepts in Chinese medicine, and particularly from the Neijing, people are like, whoa, this is kind of mind-blowing. I'm trying to get my mind around it. And my experience was a bit the opposite. I was like, oh, this actually explains what I've already been experiencing. So it's like, oh, great. That finally something makes sense so it was a little bit backwards compared to a lot of people's experience, I think.
So how did you come to this? Where was your beginning with learning this?
But it was very clear in my case. I had something that's called a spontaneous pneumothorax. I think maybe 4 or 5 of them. This means basically
Wait, you've had 4 or 5 of these?
I had, but these happened when I was 13 and 14 years old, so a long time, 40 years ago now.
Your lung would collapse.
Yeah, well, it would tear. I mean, the first time it happened is because I got the wind knocked out of me, and that was enough to tear the lung. And then once there's a little hole in it, then every breath you take, it pushes some air out into the space. And if it gets enough air on the wrong side, then it will collapse your lung. And in my case, it was on the left side. So if it collapsed, it would push into my heart and I would die. So it just kind of seemed like the tear got easier and easier to happen. And so finally the doctors did this crazy operation on me. My understanding is today the operation is a lot less invasive. It's orthoscopic, very small holes in that. But the thing they did to me was that like sort of open chest surgery. They tore it all apart and actually stuck my lungs together with talcum. This is kind of crazy if you really think about it.
They glued them together. They glued them together with talcum.
Yeah, they poured talcum in there and stuck my lungs to the inside of my ribs so they couldn't collapse. But it also didn't move anymore. So it was a pretty double-edged sword. So I was trying to figure out how to became aware that I was really not in good shape. I was so young, I didn't really subjectively notice this, but I became aware that I needed to do something to get more healthy. So I was looking for different things, and I eventually tried Tai Chi, and I thought this was great. I really liked it.
Now, how old are you when you tried Tai Chi?
I was either 17 or 18, around that age.
Okay. Yeah. So a few years after this lung issue.
Yeah, I was searching. I tried everything. I did yoga and Pilates and gym stuff and just anything I could try. I was searching for a solution to my problems. And the Tai Chi was really great, but I understood from reading that it was a martial art. And I really liked the practice, but I couldn't make a connection between the practice of these slow, gentle movements and a martial art. So that was a conundrum for me, and I went looking for an answer to that. And this led me to my teacher, who's a guy named Vince Black, and he taught Xingyi Quan, Bagua Zhang, and Taiji. So the whole sort of, the whole platform of Northern Chinese martial arts, Northern Chinese internal martial arts. And he was also a doctor of Chinese medicine. So that's where it sort of really linked up. I was like, oh, this is a great lifestyle. He does Gongfu and he has a clinic and it's all wrapped up in one. And I was like, I'd like to live like this. So
this looks pretty good. And you're a young man at this point.
Yes.
Starting to think about what you're going to do in the world. Need to make some money, need to make something of yourself.
Correct.
Do something. You're studying with this guy. You like what he's doing and he works from home. He's got a cool job.
Pretty much that was it. Yeah. I was like, oh, this is a lifestyle that I could get behind. So since then, I never looked back. I just stuck with it.
Okay. Thank you. That's been lovely. That'll be it for today. No, that's a fantastic beginning. What was it that drew you to this guy in particular?
Oh, that was actually, it was really easy because I was looking for this solution to this idea that Taiji was actually a martial art. I became aware that there was this other martial art called Bagua Zhang, which is related theoretically with the I Jing. I mean, the Bagua are the 8 trigrams. Bagua has this very overt sort of theoretical linking with the I Jing. I was already very familiar with the I Jing at that time. Before the age of 17? Yeah, I had found it on my father's bookshelf when I was probably, again, 13 or 14 years old. And it was, the Richard Willem one and...
The yellow one.
Yeah, the yellow one. And so...
With the foreword by Carl Jung, I believe.
Correct, exactly. And so my friends and I just realized we could do this cool thing, throw the coins and look it up. And we really enjoyed it. So we did that a lot for a number of years when I was a teenager. So...
Some people are smoking dope. You're playing with the I Jing.
Yeah, exactly. I had a very strangely Oriental upbringing. Like my parents are American. I grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So I was surrounded by this Buddhist culture because Chogyam Trungpa moved his whole Shambhala organization there, I think a year before I was born. So there was all this Buddhism all around, and then this I Jing thing happened. And so I guess kind of the Taiji and the Bagua sort of was a natural outgrowth.
I can see that. Now, was your dad following?
No, not at all.
The Buddhist? No, not at all.
Not at all.
How did they end up in Nova Scotia? And more importantly, how did that book end up on his bookshelf? What kind of guy was your dad?
Well, he was a librarian, so he had tons of books, tons and tons of books, which I read.
Cool.
Lots of them. I was quite precocious in the reading department, so I read a lot. But this was an interactive book. It wasn't just like in other books that became a game we could really get into. But it's notable that, I grew up with a large Buddhist temple basically around the corner from my house. It was active, ongoing, daily activity there. This is more sort of Asian influence than most people get as a young American.
So you just happen to be surrounded by these different Asian influences.
Yeah, exactly. So then I realized there's this Bagua Zhang thing, which was connect with the I Jing. And I'm like, oh, I like the I Jing and I like the Taiji. And there was a journal at the time called the Pakwa Journal. And this was pre-internet. So it was very much like the only source you could have for these information about this kind of stuff. And there was this very short list of people in North America that you could study with. And one of them was my teacher, Vince. And then it gets a bit weirder because, I identified maybe 3 or 4 people I could try to study with. I could go visit and find out if they could be someone I wanted to study with. But I started with Vince because in addition to being one of the few people who did Bagua and taught Bagua, he also lived about, 5 miles down the road from my grandparents' house in Arizona. So this was easy, an easy choice to make. And then once I went and met him, then that was that. I didn't ever really go looking for anything else after that.
Yeah, you found what you were looking for.
Yeah.
Now, where did Vince get this stuff? Because Vince is older than you. It's already a bit esoteric at your age. You find a guy who's been doing this long enough that he's teaching it. Where did Vince get this? What's his story?
Well, Vince was definitely one of the pioneers of these internal martial arts in North America. It was, again, quite like the sort of fate that led him into it. He just basically by chance found a Xingyi teacher in Los Angeles, a Taiwanese man named Shuang Ji, who had come over, during the Vietnam War times, the American military had a lot of bases in Taiwan, and the people who were there studying or there with the military, ended up studying Gongfu. And one of those guys had invited his teacher back from Taiwan back to LA, and Vince met him there. And so that was this sort of like luck that happened. And then a specific thing is something that is special about this teacher from Taiwan, we call Master Shi. He said very clearly, if you want to be a Gongfu teacher, you have to know the medicine. If you don't know the medicine, you're only half a teacher. And then he taught a very distinct, clear system of Chinese medicine that was based or, focused on what we would call Tuina, manual medicine, trauma medicine, the things that you need to look after students who are practicing martial arts.
That would make sense. I mean, with martial arts, you're learning to take people apart. You're going to get injured.
Yep. And even without the fighting, you're encouraging and teaching people to push themselves quite hard, really hard to train to become sort of their best person they can be. This also needs to be managed. People have a tendency to get hurt when they push themselves too. Now, it's also interesting because this Master Shi came from this milieu that was Taipei in the 1950s and 60s, which means it was that whole huge melting pot of everyone who ran away from the communists and all got packed into Taiwan. And all the sort of old mores about how to, the kind of interactions between different Kung Fu families kind of changed because they were all stuffed in there together. And so it was a very kind of eclectic system that we inherited, in which, lots of different influences kind of came together.
History is so interesting, and the accidents of history. I don't know how many people know about the history of Taiwan and what happened. I mean, maybe many people know that there was a communist revolution in China, and those nasty nationalists got kicked out. They went running to Taiwan, which was its own thing, right? It's its own culture, and it's had long history with the mainland. But like you were saying, all of a sudden there's this hodgepodge of people from different parts of China all thrown together. The Taipei area is not that large.
No, they were definitely packed in there together for sure.
They were packed in there. So you had people from like all over China. Now they're squeezed into this smaller space.
Yes, and also just prior to that, they had been ruled by the Japanese for 50 years. And they had always been this kind of commercial hub. So they had commercial relations, like really wide-ranging commercial relations all over, the Asia, basically, as far away as India and Australia. So all these things came in as influences. And so the interesting thing that happened with our stuff is that you already had this melting pot, and we can really see that parts of the Xingyi system that we practice, Xingyi Chuan is another one of these internal martial arts. It has influences you can see very directly from some Indian martial arts, from Indonesian martial arts, from Japanese martial arts, and of course all the various kinds of Chinese arts. All these things were they put them together very purposely with the goal in mind of optimizing the training for modern city dwellers, because the people living in Taipei in the 1960s and 70s were not so different from us compared to Chinese people 100 years ago living in China, where it was really a different world. So they were like, the old ways of doing things don't really work. We're in a different world now. And they started adapting. Then it got adapted further by my teacher, Vince, and it came over to America. And so we have this very, again, eclectic kind of adaptation to the modern world of these traditional arts. It's pretty interesting.
This is one of the things that I think is, I want to say emblematic. Maybe emblematic's not the right word. It's in the DNA of Chinese medicine. Maybe let's say Chinese cultivative arts. But I'm thinking medicine more because I practice that. One of the things that I've noticed about Chinese medicine is that it adapts and it changes, right? One of the very key foundational things we learn is, well, if you're working in a dry environment, you're probably going to see certain kinds of issues and you're going to treat it in these kinds of ways. If you're living in a wet environment, it's probably going to be different. And so while there are these very fundamental principles, in fact, you can take them back to like the I Ching, right? How they unfold in the moment is very much an interaction of that moment. And so it makes sense to me that the martial arts that you're talking about, the cultivative internal practices, it would be the same thing. It takes the influences of where they've been. It takes the influences of where they are. It's got this DNA that runs through it from who knows when, long time. and something new emerges in this moment. But it's old and it's new, and it's old and it's new.
Well, yeah, and it's definitely these arts that I'm talking about, the way they came through to me, they're definitely based in the medical science, which means the Neijing. They're these people for the last, as far back as we can really trace, which doesn't go back that far, maybe 150 years at the most. A high predominance of all the sort of the masters, the teachers were also doctors. They made their living often as doctors. They couldn't really, you didn't make a living so much as a martial artist unless, it could happen, but a lot of people, they made their living as doctors. And so then their way they devised their training methodologies were totally informed by the thinking coming straight from the Neijing. But interestingly applied to these ideas of how do you train, how do you optimize people's physical performance. It's a little bit different than the idea of the internal cultivation. We talk about like Taoist internal cultivation and this kind of thing, because didn't have this kind of mystical goal. It had the goal of just optimizing your physical performance and your health. So it's very interesting how, again, like I was saying earlier, the ideas are expressed through the physical culture. So for me, as I came across more and more understanding about the Neijing and the very, like, whatever people call today classical ideas, they were just the reflections of what we had already been learning, except that as learning them, it was just through practicing. There was no real verbiage. No one explained the theory behind it. They said, this is just how you do it. So this is sort of my big focus, really, is this understanding, this interplay between the theories, but not applied, quote unquote, medically, but applied to this practice, to what physical culture.
This is the complete opposite of how medicine is taught today.
I'm kind of aware of this, exactly. This is also one of the inspirations why I contacted you and said, hey, maybe I could join with you for a conversation, because I listened to some of the guests you have and I'm like, oh, they have some really neat ideas, and they're kind of expressing like how they're discovering things that are kind of like going back to the beginning of where I started, and people are working their way up to some of the points like I took as starting points. Not to say I'm advanced. It's all sort of cyclical, just they're different ideas.
Yes, I like that. Cyclical and different starting points.
And I think we're all involved in this thing that's really cool. And I see it super clearly through the martial arts environment, in that the transmission is really new and really evolving. And we're sort of witnessing it become deeper and more solid and rooted in our own culture. Back to what you said, it has to adapt to our culture, and it kind of changes. Well, the principles stay the same, but we really are sort of increasing our understanding year by year, collectively. The transmission in the past was, for so many different reasons, quite weak. Like, again, weak maybe is a bit wrong, kind of loaded word to use, but I mean, we had far fewer people that could speak Chinese. We had far fewer people that had serious friendships and relationships with Chinese people. The ability to communicate back and forth, even just things like the internet and the speed with which we can communicate now, is totally different. So it's very cool to see these things growing, and taking these different ideas and being able to put them together into, again, I'm always thinking of optimizing the potential of things.
Well, that is, I think, a big thing that we see with all kinds of medicine these days. I think it's why functional medicine is so popular, because they're speaking to the idea we're going to optimize what's going on. People that are into the whole biohacking thing, they're looking at optimization. You've started your, I want to say, practice journey. God, I hate that word journey. It's like so overused these days, but I don't know what other word to substitute. But your path with it started with physical practice. It didn't start with mental constructs. It started with physical understandings. And I want to circle back to that in a minute, because I know we talk a lot about cultivation and using some of the different cultivative practices for that embodied sense of things. I want to come back to that in a bit. But I first want to talk a bit about transmission. This is a word that I hear frequently. And sometimes I hear certain words or there's certain ideas, and I don't really understand it. I think I'm supposed to, because, well, I do this stuff and people talk about, oh, I'm transmitting a lineage. And I'm thinking, I got no idea what you're talking about. I mean, it sounds good, and I feel like I should I should know, but I don't. And I always get a little nervous, quite frankly, when I hear about things like, well, this was transmitted from my teacher. And I'm thinking, well, what if your teacher was a goofball? So help me understand something about transmission. Because just, again, I don't really get it. And when I think about it, I very quickly go to this kind of woo-woo thing like, well, it's a Vulcan mind meld, but I don't think it's quite that either. So speak to me a little bit about this. Help me understand it.
Well, I would immediately want to talk about sort of two different things. When I had used the term transmission just a few moments ago, I was really talking about the whole process of transmitting, but passing the knowledge of Chinese medicine from China and Chinese culture and to the West, and let's just say to America, since we're in America, This is just involves a lot of technical stuff. Like at the beginning, books had to be translated and courses had to be devised. And, we were exposed to that program, that traditional Chinese medicine program created by the communist government. And that had a big influence on all the early practitioners. At the same time, someone like my teacher, Vince, had a direct relationship, a personal relationship with a teacher in Taiwan who was transmitting something different than that Communist Party construct. So that was it. But we're just talking purely about the information, the way he explained things, but the way he was able to explain things. Because Vince's teacher, Master Shi, he couldn't really speak English that well. And no one on our side spoke Chinese. So it was a lot of nonverbal communication, really. Again, we're talking about practicing martial arts and practicing medicine based in tuina, physical manipulation. So it was like show you what to do, and then you practice what to do it. Now, this then ties into the sort of more personal kind of transmission thing, which is very complicated. And I'm very sympathetic to what you said, that you don't really know what people mean, and maybe you're a little bit like skeptical of a lot of times when the word is being used.
I live in the state of Missouri. Our motto here, it's the show me state. I am naturally skeptical.
Because becomes the difficulty. People can mean almost anything they want with these things. When I personally am talking about it for my own personal self, I'm talking about this idea that we got this medicine and these martial arts systems that came from China into Taiwan, from Taiwan to the United States. This transmission happened by one person, Shuangji, teaching another one person, my teacher Vince, and then Vince teaching me. Now, there are a lot of other people involved all through. There's a whole school full of students, but I can only speak to the part that I took part in personally, So that's something that was transmitted to me, and that was related, though, or limited by my capacities and my teacher's capacities. His capacity to explain things and to demonstrate things and all those things, and my capacity to pick up on what he was doing. If he shows you a tuina technique and it's a completely nonverbal thing going on, it's your manual dexterity, your ability to watch and follow the movements that he's making and then reduplicate them in your own body. These are all factors that totally influence this transmission of information. Also, again, the parts you can put in the books. You can put some parts in the books. Other parts you cannot put in the books. How do the people who put the things into the books think about that? Like, do they take that into account, or do they think they're putting the whole truth and nothing but the truth in that book? Because that's going to change the way they're doing it. The people who are reading it, do they think they're getting everything they need out of that book, or do they realize they need other kinds of inputs as well? All this is part of this transmission thing, right? So it's very, very complicated. To make a long story short, it's very, very complicated.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, a practice management software and EMR built to support you in the day-to-day work of running your business. If you're a health or wellness practitioner, you already know the care you provide starts well before your patient arrives and extends well beyond the treatment room. Jane is here to support every part of that experience. With online booking, your patients can book a time that works for them, and with features like waitlist notifications, they'll even be able to grab a last-minute opening when those pop up. It's an easy way to keep your schedule full while getting your patients the care that they need. During your appointment, Jane's AI-powered documentation feature can help you thoughtfully take notes so you can stay present with the person who's in front of you. After appointments, you can end your time together on a healing note, not a transactional one, by charging the credit card on file and rebooking before they head out the door. To learn more about how Jane can support you and your patients, head to jane.app/demo. One more thing, if you're ready to get started with Jane, use the code QIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. I think what I hear you saying about transmission, it's not some kind of psycho-spiritual mind meld. It's literally how technology is passed from one generation to another. Let me show you how this is done. Let me show you how to tune this carburetor. Let me show you how to open up these joints. And it seems to me, this is funny in a way, but the lack of having a common language other than physical body movement and showing people how things feel might actually be really helpful when learning hands-on Swain-on techniques.
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, that's in terms of something like the martial arts or this manual medicine, it's the only thing that really matters at the end of the day. However, having the good words to explain the theory behind it is also pretty important. And this has been my experience that once I became able to directly interface with the Neijing myself, I realized, oh, this is saying everything my teachers have been trying to say, but better. It's the reason it's a classic, the reason it's survived for 2,000 years. No one can make it up the way as well as the Neijing has already put it. So this made a big difference for me, getting this like very clear insights.
So you say more direct experience with the Neijing. Direct experience. Tell me about that.
So again, back to this sort of idea of transmission and passing knowledge. And I wanted to add, you were saying like a technology kind of transmission. I think this is totally true, totally correct. I also think it's cultural. There's a heavy cultural component, which means how you see things, how you think about things. This gets transmitted as well, your attitudes to different kinds of things. This is a big part of it. So being in this martial arts environment, we were like told we had to look back and remember the way things were taught before, because the change is inevitable. Like you were saying, it always adapts to the new environment. So the change is constant and inevitable. The thing that's hard is to keep it, the parts that are the principles that have to stay the same. This is the big danger. It's easy to mutate, and this is not in a bad, mutation is not necessarily bad, but it's easy to change beyond all recognition. What's hard is to allow it to change as necessary without losing the essential pieces. And so in terms of medicine, even from the very beginning, I was told you have to study the Neijing. At that time, the only Neijing we had was Ilse-Vieth. Now, I don't know if everyone's aware of Ilse-Vieth, what I mean by that, but do you know what I'm talking about? No?
I don't know.
Ilse-Vieth was I think an anthropologist and historian. She was writing books in the like 1940s, 50s, maybe 1960s. She did the first English translation of a Huangdi Ning, but it was only a couple of chapters, and it was like a part of her PhD work or something. She was not a doctor, she's not a practitioner in any way. Her interest was not actually about medicine. It was just in doing this scholarly work of translating an ancient text. So that's what we had. That was the only thing we had to work with. And then we were very fortunate to meet a man named Dr. Van Guy, Nguyen Van Guy. Do you know who he is?
Don't.
He was a French Vietnamese MD and acupuncturist, who his main life work was to translate the Neijing into French. But Vietnamese, he was about 95 and died in about 1998 or 99. So when he was young, he was trained to read Vietnamese, but with Chinese characters before they got the Vietnamese script. So it means he would read the Neijing, but he would read it like directly into Vietnamese in his head.
Using Chinese characters.
Right, because he had been trained to use the Chinese characters for Vietnamese, So he had this very strange Vietnamese Neijing translated into French. And he was an MD, so he spent most of his life educating other MDs about the Neijing. we were fortunate enough to have him come, and he did the last ever seminar, the last ever teaching that he did before he died was in Tucson, Arizona, because Vince had invited him to come. And so here's this 95-year-old Vietnamese guy dressed in a suit and a tie. And he told us all kinds of crazy stuff about like when hanging out with Ho Chi Minh and stuff like this. But he also said, he was very clear. He was like very direct. He was like, if you call yourself an acupuncturist and you don't read the Neijing, you're not. End of story. He was just like, that's it. So this was a big inspiration, to want to learn more about it. And again, so we worked with all the different translations and anything we could find in English. And eventually I came around to realize that I just had to learn to read it myself. I got sensitized to the fact that it was saying things in Chinese that were so much better than what I was reading in English. So I went to Taiwan and lived there for a couple of years and went to school and learned to speak Chinese and read classical Chinese so that I could read the Neijing myself. That's the long story short there.
You went to the source.
Yeah, exactly.
When were you in Taiwan?
When?
Yeah.
The living I was started in 2017, I think.
Oh, so not that long ago.
No, not that long ago. Now, I had been going to Taiwan on many occasions, so this was also because our martial arts, lineage goes back to Taiwan. So I'd been there lots of times just on short trips, but living full-time there was started in 2017.
And where did you study? Where did you learn your Chinese? Were you just hanging out on the street or did you go to school?
No. I went to a program called the ICLP, the International Chinese Language Program at TAIDA at the Taiwan National University, which was this cool setup. It was originally set up in the 1960s because Stanford University had lost all of its sort of postgraduate studies departments that were in Beijing. So in 1949, they lost their contacts in China. And so by the early 1960s, they were having a problem where they were having people, I don't know if there were women or not at that time, but people getting to PhD level studies in Chinese without having actually ever spoken Chinese.
Oh, that would be a problem, wouldn't it?
Right. So they could read very well, but they had like really no speaking skills. So this department at the Taiwan National University was set up to teach them to speak. And so it has a very specific methodology. It's really nice. You're in a very small class, maximum 2 or 3 other people, and you just spend all your time talking. Originally, they were like, we're not going to teach you Chinese. You should already know Chinese. We're just going to teach you how to talk it. So now they've adapted to the modern times. I started basically from scratch and was taught Chinese. But again, with this heavy influence on we're just going to talk. Native speakers they just learn by talking, and then you go to school and learn grammar and stuff. But let's just start talking. Right. So that's what I did.
Yeah, there's something about listening to people talk and knowing how to speak it yourself. Let me give you an example. We learn in Chinese medicine school that okay, cold is a problem. Don't drink ice water. And that sounds really weird in English, and it sounds weird to Americans. But when you live in Taiwan and you hear about people and they say, oh, well, right, it's like, I'm sick. I received cold. You're like, holy shit, that sounds exactly like Chinese medicine. But they're not talking Chinese medicine. This is how people are. This is how they think. Here's a great one. And I remember when I was in Taiwan, I was there a little bit earlier than you, but I got to hang out with an old doctor. And people would come in all the time. He'd ask them, how you doing? What's going on? And they go, oh, 我上火了. All right, I have heat rising. Okay. We have an idea in Chinese medicine what heat rising is, but I came to find out heat rising means I feel out of sorts. I'm a little irritable and I'm just kind of out of sorts. And I used to laugh about it. I used to think it was funny. It was just a way to say out of sorts. And now it's very popular in our culture. People come in and you say, what's going on? They go, well, I have inflammation. But it's the same thing.
Exactly. And except I would like to think, or I do think that when you say inflammation, it's somewhat abstract compared to saying I have heat rising. Heat rising is a very embodied, subjective feeling of what you're feeling compared to I have inflammation. Inflammation is, like I say, kind of abstract. But this brings us right back around to my main interest is exactly what you just described, that there's a whole layer of the potential of Chinese medicine that is cultural. This is how if we start with the Neijing, and it says right at the very beginning, that famous passage that everyone sort of is aware of that says if you treat after they're already sick, it's like digging a well when you're already thirsty. And my whole perspective on the Neijing, I'm like, it's got to be taken seriously. It's not talking made up stuff or stuff that's just abstract and theoretical. It's hard to understand because of all the hurdles, the time, the language, all this kind of stuff. But actually, it's just laying out very concrete concepts to use in life and in the practice of medicine. And so it starts off and says, you have to maintain this balance before you get sick. After you get sick, you're already way behind the ball. And that's a cultural thing. The way you do that is by people being aware that, in fact, drinking cold water isn't very good for you. And that when the cold hits your neck, it does, in fact, cause problems. This idea of inflammation feels like heat rising often, things like this. It's exactly a cultural endeavor. This is coming back to what we've already been discussing. Like my experience started off as a cultural thing. I started off by going to being in this environment of training martial arts in which these things were a given. The ice, the cold thing, they were like, you're getting injured, you're spraining your ankles, you're tweaking your elbow and stuff. And we would be told, never put ice on your injury. And this is the same.
Total opposite of what we have here in the West.
Exactly. And but it's the same as just knowing that ice water is not so good for you either. It's this appreciation of the sort of noxious potential of cold, but also supported I gotta say, in the terms of our martial arts, supported by alternatives, because it's the big hurdle is if you say, don't ice your sprained ankle, what do? You have no alternative. Like, what else are you supposed to do?
So that's a great question. And I think our listeners might find it helpful too. What do you do if you're not going to be using ice? Because most of our patients are going to come in saying, well, I iced it. Good for me.
Yeah.
Or they'll ask, if you say, hey, ice is for dead things, don't do that. It's like, okay, doc, what do I do?
And the simple answer is if you have the availability, you use herbs, external herbs. The most go-to one would be the sanwansan, the 3 yellow powder. And it works like a charm. It completely will deflame that sprained ankle just so well, so efficiently.
Okay. For folks that don't know what san huangsan, what's in it?
This is the 3 yellows, so the rhubarb root, the da huang, the huanglian, and the huangbai. So scularia and philodendron bark. So yeah, I always have these issues. There's some supply and demand things we have to talk about. Like you don't want to ice your ankle, but you have to have access to these herbs, for example.
You need something to take that heat out and move the blood.
But these herbs are very easy to grow and common. If the idea took hold in our culture, then there would be people supplying this indigenously with these herbs. No problem. I mean, so much so that I recently was in a small town in Vermont, and they basically had this sanwansan at the grocery store checkout counter. But it was in a little packaged up in this with some kind of, it looked like a pharmaceutical kind of thing or like a tiger balm kind of thing. But it was essentially sanwansan, and it was there in Vermont. So, I mean, these things are already kind of happening,
At the checkout stand.
Yep, exactly. And even if you didn't, if you had the idea that the icing is not good for you, and then you didn't have access to these kind of Chinese herbs, there's still, alternatives would be forthcoming once people set their minds to it. We have lots of different kind of cooling and anti-inflammatory herbal medicines, or plants that we can access in Western traditions as well as the Chinese tradition.
And there's the whole dita chow from the Chinese traditions as well, the different liniments and things.
Yeah, and
it all comes from the martial arts traditions.
Yep, and those, again, it's the same kind of thing. It just gets more complicated. The 3 yellows, it's 3 herbs. It's really easy and simple. The dita chows are, you have to kind of get into it a bit. You have to be a bit of an herbalist to understand dita chow properly.
And it takes time to distill those out.
Yeah, exactly.
They got to cook.
I actually teach a course in which we go through part of it is, it's about external herbs. But so we go through all the different dita chows that I could find available on the market. And when you look at them all, they're all quite different. And they're not all going to do the same things for you. So if you just think, oh, it's dita chow, and you grab it, it may or may not be what you actually need at that time,
Right. Which dita chow is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it for early stage or late stage?
Yeah, or the best ones are so complicated with maybe 25 or 30 herbs in there that it's incredibly adaptogenic and you can use it on everything. That's the best case scenario. But those ones that you can use on everything, again, if you have a very, say, old, stiff joint that's been injured a long time ago, you could use a better liniment than a ditdachal for that, you know? So there's considerations when you get into, it's medicine. So you have, it's always going to be a bit complicated.
It's always going to be a bit complicated. And that, I mean, for me, that's really part of the fun.
For sure.
Right? There's a part of me that, because I grew up in the West, it'd be great if you had the magic bullet. Oh, you got this problem. Here's the thing, done. I think that's what Western medicine aims at. We got one thing, it'll help everybody, one and done. But Chinese medicine, we're looking at like, well, who is the person? First of all, what's their constitution? And where are they in the process? And what's right for them at this moment? I'm going to come around and use a word here in a different way. Transmission, right? It's like, what do I need to transmit as a practitioner to this unique person at this moment in time that they'll be able to receive and use in a way that will help them?
That's definitely getting into the real nitty-gritty of medicine and treating, people who are out of balance, essentially. Yeah. I like to be very focused on ideas like with this idea we're just talking about with sprained ankles. If you treat the sprained ankle properly at the beginning, it's the same as what you're just saying, the right thing at the right time for the person. You avoid all kinds of problems in the future that you're never even going to know about. But when they're left untreated or badly treated, then you end up with stiff ankle and compromised circulation there, changes in their gait, which then changes the way that their hips and their low back work. This then leads, to other problems 15, 20 years down the road, blah, 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 a whole domino effect. I really am into this idea that when you treat things appropriately at the right time, meaning right as they're happening, you just avoid so much of these other issues. This is, again, cultural aspect to the medicine.
Yes. It's curious to me that we're having this conversation at this moment in time. Everything you're saying makes sense to me. But for some weird reason, over the past couple of weeks, I've just had a plethora of people come in with like, well, I was injured in a car accident 19 years ago. And it's curious to me that they'll say that. Often people just go, my back hurts, fix my back. But I've had people coming in and telling me about old injuries. And then this hurts or that hurts. So, and of course that makes sense. But it's so much harder to unwind that stuff and treat it 19 years after the fact. What are some thoughts that you have on working with that kind of thing?
You mean with working on these kind of things that happened long ago and are
things that have happened long ago?
Right.
The body's been compromised. It's successfully compensated itself into a knee problem, a hip problem, and now they got a neck problem.
Right. No, so I have a very clear ideas about this. Again, from a sort of more like my personal experience. Like I was telling you, we under Vince's tutelage, we had this system that came from Taiwan, but it came adapted to America. And this adaptation really happened through blending with osteopathy. So we were taught to do a lot of techniques that came out of the osteopathic tradition. And one of the ways we talk about this is called unwinding. And it's a way of allowing the body to sort of free itself or find the route that it needs to take to untwisting itself, as it were. The idea being that the problems are always happening because the circulation is compromised in some fashion. Now, this is exactly copacetic with the Nei Jing's idea. If the channels are open and everything is moving, then it'll be all right. You will heal. And so I had this sort of my own personal experience starting that way. And then if I turn to the Neijing, it's very clear. I believe, if I'm not wrong, it's Ling Shu chapter 2. It says, you have a thorn stuck in your flesh. You have muddy water. You have a rope that's knotted. It doesn't matter how long these things have been there. The thorn can be pulled out. The water can be cleaned. The rope can be unknotted. If someone tells you that it can't be done, they don't really know the art yet.
So it's not that it can't be done. It's just that they don't know how to do it.
And these images are all very apropos. I mean, if you think about how you undo a really knotted up rope, you have to just very carefully start picking away at it until it unravels enough that there starts to be space. And my experience with working with these kind of old, conditions that have started long ago, but I mean, honestly, really every condition is ultimately comes back to this. You just unravel it until there's enough space for the metabolism to start running, and then the improvements start to happen, or the balance starts to be refound. And it's just a matter of having the patience to carefully go through and unravel it. To me, it's exactly like that knot analogy. You just have to carefully start and step by step, pull here, pull there until it opens up.
Loosen this, loosen that, give it a slight twist, create space.
And I often find myself thinking this or contemplating on the fact that this kind of comes from this martial arts tradition, and this very hands-on manual therapy kind of tradition. And I think we've already sort of touched on this. There's not a lot of theory, or the theory is sort of secondary to just doing the thing, Yes, I think anatomy is utterly important, and both Western anatomy and the sort of channel anatomy, both these things you should have in your mind very clearly when you're working. But then you just kind of go step by step, and you don't have not the intellectual part of it is less important than the actual step by step part of it.
The actual hands-on. Yeah. Tell me a little more about this unwinding.
Essentially, it comes down to not imposing your idea or your preconceived idea on the situation, but feeling for what someone's body wants to do.
Again, this is the complete opposite of how I think most of us are trained in Chinese medicine. We have an idea, we have a theory, we have a diagnosis, we have a flow chart, and we are imposing our idea.
Well, and this is, about the intellectual part, right? Because I would have this kind of ideas as well in terms of thinking to myself, oh, there's some issues here with the liver, and maybe there's some liver yang rising that's causing some headaches or something. And then I also have an idea that I want to treat the liver channel. But then I start using my hands and feeling around, and whatever happens that day is going to be dictated by what's happening as I'm feeling around, as much as by my idea beforehand. But in particular, it's when you're working. What you're describing is what you think about before you start working. But then when you start working, you have to, you're actually holding the person's leg. Then you have to allow the leg to talk to you. You can't just decide you're going to do this thing to the leg. This is the unwinding idea. It's also cool because this unwinding idea comes from the osteopathic tradition, a very much American thing. But again, we go back to this idea of transmission and what we received from the tradition in Taiwan. There they said, just follow the qi. The qi doesn't lie. And that was it, because again, not much English to work with. Follow the qi. The qi doesn't lie. So then you ask yourself, well, what does that mean exactly? And so back to the transmission, I was shown what it meant by my teacher, Vince, but it was up to me to understand what he was trying to show and then practice it. But the point I'm making here is that it was kind of the same thing. This unwinding was a way of talking about it with a more Western way of talking about it from the osteopathic people. And the follow the qi was a way of talking about it from the Chinese cultural perspective. But they're both kind of saying the same thing. Don't decide ahead of time. Follow what's happening. And that's how you're going to find your way.
Don't decide ahead of time. Put your hands on. Follow what's happening. Okay. That's a really interesting state of mind to be in, right? Because you're not yet you're not bringing it into the conceptual realm, but it is in your attentional realm.
Yes, exactly. The other thing that the Chinese tradition tells you very clearly is that the qi follows, the intention leads the qi. So where you put your intention, that's where things are going to start to happen. So, yeah. But, this comes back to, again, this idea that I'm coming out of this martial tradition. So going into a treatment, it was not just theoretically, but like literally put to me as the same as going into a fight. You can't know what's going to happen. You can only control certain aspects of the situation, and you have to kind of have your, be one with the Tao and open yourself to the possibilities and go with it. Each time you sat down, you had to sort of have your attitude of being centered in yourself and opening yourself to the possibilities. That was every time you sat down with a client, you had to come at it that way.
Golden Flower Chinese Herbs is celebrating 35 years of existence. Wow, what a journey it's been. It started because the baby boom generation was frustrated with conventional medicine. In the 1970s, there was a resurgence of interest in what was considered natural healing modalities. After President Nixon's visit to China, acupuncture started to emerge from the Chinese communities into greater awareness. It was a magical moment. 2025 is the 50th anniversary of the legal practice of acupuncture in the state of California. Oh my, the awareness and access to acupuncture has grown incredibly. So much has changed since back then. But some hasn't. Like many companies, Golden Flower Chinese Herbs does a lot of business through their excellent website. But they still have real humans who answer the phones. You won't get lost in a voicemail messaging maze when you call. Like our medicine, Golden Flower Chinese Herbs is a bit old-fashioned. Visit them at gfcherbs.com or pick up the phone and give them a call. I hadn't thought about that in those terms. Go into a treatment as if you're going into a fight. All right, a lot of people would hear that and go, well, that's kind of violent and, you're imposing your will. But was it George Foreman or some wise person? Something about like, you've got a plan until you get punched in the nose. Right? And then, it all falls apart. That idea that in a fight, which I haven't been in too many, I've been kind of a pacifist my whole life. It might have been better if I'd learned to fight more. That idea that you're going into something and you don't know what's going to happen yet, you have to be very attentive to the situation. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, and the truth is, in the martial arts world, if you learn pretty quickly that if the goal is to be calm and centered in yourself, and if you are able to do that, then 9 times out of 10, you don't have to be in a fight, The fight doesn't have to materialize if you don't get carried away. Then there's all kinds of different situations that can involve fighting and violence, But if you're not a professional, that calmness avoids that's the whole point, is to develop this centered calmness that avoids conflict rather than promotes conflict. So, it is a bit weird to say like a treatment is like going into a fight, but then once you really get into the philosophy behind it, not so much.
Yeah, you may not need the fight. There's that. There's all kinds of great martial art teaching stories about people who have avoided fights. There's also a piece that if you're prepared for the fight, if you've trained and you're capable of fighting, that puts you in a very different position than not being able to fight.
Exactly. Yep. And then treatment, when you're doing treatments, very powerful treatments are often quite scary to perform. You have to take control of a scary situation, be responsible for someone's suffering, possibly induce more suffering in them in the short term to reduce suffering in the longer term. All this kind of stuff involves potentially a very kind of martial attitude towards what you're doing,
Because when you unravel those knots, who knows what gets released sometimes.
There's definitely that aspect. Yeah. And also this maybe the thing that has to be done is going to be pretty unpleasant for the next 20 minutes and then even for the next week. And then after, things are going to start to become much better, but you have to take responsibility for that initial unpleasantness.
And enough experience and understanding that you can see the landscape, so to speak, that this may not be pleasant in the moment, but it's going to get them to a significantly different place.
Yes. And now we're back to the transmission again, because how do you have the confidence to do something like that if you've never seen it done by your teacher?
You have to see, I would think you'd have to have seen it done.
Yes, I think so. I totally agree. The more, whatever we want to call powerful or interventions that you could do, it'd be a very rare person who's going to make that stuff up on their own.
Yeah, we do rely on our teachers in very profound ways to guide us, to give us kind of I think of it as a scaffolding, a bit of experience, a scaffolding, a framework which over time we get to modify on our own
Well,
as
yeah.
we get experience.
Yep. Yeah, it becomes your own in the end. You're not your teacher. You're going to be your own person, which is going to be your own expression. Again, back to the change is always constant. It's keeping to the principles that's the real challenge.
Yeah.
Which again brings me back to my theme, like the idea about the Nei Jing. It provides us with these principles. They've already lasted 2,000 years, and we can always be referring back to those to know if we're within the stream, like if we haven't diverged so far that we're doing something totally new and different. That's part of what I think is so cool about it.
Do you have any favorite passages that you go to, or do you find that at different stages of development for yourself, there's different portions of that text that speak to you, that get your attention?
I mean, like the things I've already talked about, these two passages, the one in which it says, to obtain the Tao is to treat before the illness arises. I take this very seriously. I know that in reality, we're constantly confronted with people who are already out of balance and are already sick, and that's okay. But the goal we have to shoot for is this understanding that if we do things right, we can always stop the disease from arising. Because, this is kind of what it's always saying. It's saying the disease is starting. It doesn't have a form yet. Who can see it? No one can see it. But this is what we're trying to do. See that thing that doesn't have a form yet. So this kind of thing the Neijing is full of very concrete technique and very concrete kind of technical information. But then there's passages like this which form an underpinning to the whole attitude towards it, which is kind of where I really like those passages. Yeah.
Ethan, this reminds me a little bit of being able to smell the weather.
What do you mean by that exactly? Smell the weather?
Well, when I was a kid, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have apps. There was a weather report that was on the news, or you could read it in the newspaper. I spent a lot of time outside as a kid, and I spent a lot of time sailing as well. And one of the things that I used to be able to do pretty well as a younger person was smell rain hours before it was going to arrive.
Mm.
Like look at the sky and realize, oh, we have a storm coming. I'm not sure when it's going to be here, but I want to prepare because I know it's coming. Or it's going to snow. I think it's very easy to smell snow. So there's a way of interacting with the outside environment, the weather, if you will, the climactic factors, right? The qi, if you wish, in a way that is embodied, in a way that you can sense it and then take action based on what you're sensing. And when I hear you talking about being able to kind of see or sense, but see is maybe some people see it, other people may feel it, other people may hear it, maybe other people smell it. Sense. There's a way of sensing what's not formed. And I do think we can train ourselves to that. I think we practice long enough. Our clinical work will train us if we're paying attention.
No, I think you're exactly. And again, your connection there with the weather is exactly apropos. This is what the Neijing's whole point is, that our interaction with the environment around us is what needs to be balanced. When it gets out of balance, that's what ultimately causes us to become sick. And again, There's a lot of technical information about specifically how, but just being aware of these things to start with is exactly what we're talking about.
Yes. And then we have the opposite side, which is there's a thorn, there's dirty water. We have things knotted together, and there's ways of working with that as well. It's a different side of the spectrum.
Well, and I think they very much go together in terms of a lot of times what's that thorn that's in you. It's the cold that got into after you sprained your ankle and it wasn't treated, and then your feet got cold, and because the circulation was already compromised from the ankle injury, it stayed in your ankle joint, and now there's a chunk of cold in there, and that's affecting the circulation in your kidney channel, and this ultimately is affecting the metabolism of your kidneys, and boom, So,
I've got a patient I saw yesterday, ankle injury. There's a spot that's white.
Yep.
And they've got the foot problem going on. Oh yeah, look, there it is.
But this is again what I mean about the whole concept of this sort of physicality of it, the level which is less intellectual. You find that ankle is cold. Maybe they didn't complain about this at all. Maybe they're there for something seemingly unrelated, but in the process of your work and your examinations, you find this cold in the ankle affecting the kidney channel, and then so you get rid of that, and then things are better. even though, it's not necessarily intellectually directly related to what your theory is telling you to treat,
Can you walk me through, help me get a sense of this sort of mind space that you're inhabiting when you sit down with somebody and you put your hands on them? I mean, you've already talked about, in some ways, it's like preparing for a fight. Not a fisticuffs fight, but, a higher level fight like we were just discussing. Tell me a little bit about the space you bring yourself into. What happens with your sensorium?
Honestly, it's very prosaic. I mean, I work in a clinic. We often are seeing, 15 or 20 people in a day. It's not like a calm, zen-ish kind of environment for the practitioners. I mean, I really just don't think about it too much. I guess that's a kind of a zen thing, but
I don't think about it. I
my hands do a lot. This is something I can say very, very clearly. You just mentioned a couple minutes ago about how we can't really assume the way someone else might be experiencing things, if seeing it or feeling it or the way that these subtle sensations come to you. In my case, it's my hands just kind of feel things. And I guess that would be the answer to your question, is that my hands are kind of leading. And then my brain is also making a lot of blah, blah, blah about theory and stuff, but it's trying to make sense of what my hands are finding rather than my brain deciding and then my hands looking for something. My hands go and do it. And then I make sense of what I found after the fact. I also have to say, I feel very much, this is a new idea that I've had in the last couple of years. I've really started to feel that my clinical work is very much a craft. And so like a craft, if you're a potter, you make the same dishes and plates and teapots over and over again. It's not a new experimental thing. You're not doing something new all the time. We all know that a craftsman, a craftwoman has this process where there's an art to what they're doing as well. But a teapot is a teapot nonetheless. And I feel like that, like I like doing the same thing over and over again. I know the kind of good it does to people. It's always a little bit different each time, but it's always the same also. So this idea, this feeling of a craft is something that I like a lot.
I really love that. I really love that. It rhymes with a way that I look at it as well. When I was a kid in junior high school, I had shop class and I loved it. I loved shop class. I loved making things with my hands. It was my favorite. And my parents wouldn't let me take any other shop classes because, it's, you're going to college and you're not working with your damn hands. But I love working with my hands. And I love thinking about the work that I do as craft. There's an earthiness to it. There's a stillness to it. There is a kind of embodiment of the moment, a sense of being able to pause and observe. There's so much that goes into craft. Some of it is just putting your hands on a material and appreciating what that material is. And some of it is thinking about what you want to do with it. And some of it is like asking it, what would you like me to do with you? There's so much that goes into craft. And so often, this is just me, I hear people talking about, well, I'm a doctor, I'm not a technician. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm a technician, but I'm that craftsman technician,
Well, that's it exactly. That technician-y part of the craft is very strong. And I'm very comfortable with, I know what good I do. I don't mind if I can't do everything. My craft is my craft. Like I'm very happy and confident in what I am able to do with it. I'm also really into the thing of, it doesn't mean you keep coming back to the same things over and over again and expect to keep coming back to the same things over and over again for your entire career or your entire life. And to me, this is also really wonderful. If we're talking about the potter again, I expect my teapot to be somehow more masterful 20 years from now than it is now, because I'm going to keep making the same teapots for another 20 years, and it's just going to get better and better, even though it's still just a teapot. So
it's just a teapot.
This is exactly the kind of the way that I look at it.
I love it. I love it. That's very inspiring, and it just leaves open a wide field of exploration, which is one of my favorite parts of what this medicine has invited me into. So I really appreciate your thoughts on this. You're doing some teaching and things online, aren't you? What are you doing?
Well, yeah. So this kind of adventure that I've been on with the Nei Jing that we talk about is sort of my whole career has been involved with the Neijing, but in the last, whatever it is now, 8 or 9 years, it's become so much more clear because of the direct involvement with the text. And then this happened because I had the availability to go to Taiwan and learn Chinese. If I look at what is available to people in the English-speaking world, if they want to learn more about the Neijing, there's some very good courses there, but it's all very clinical and focused on professionals. They're very long courses. They're quite expensive. And if you're not already an acupuncturist, it's not really accessible to you. Whereas you see this theme I'm talking about, I see this huge potential of the medicine in a cultural context. What we're talking about with Taiwan, the people being aware of the cold and the heat and the way this is experiencing their lives through those concepts. So I want to sort of add something different to the mix and the conversation about the Neijing and offer a course in which it's focused not on medical professionals, but on people who just might have an interest in learning more about this. There's a certain aspect that it's for like people who already do kind of martial arts stuff will be obviously attracted because of that connection. Also, we're using a form of Qigong called Jinglo Qigong, which Jinglo is Chinese for the channels and collaterals. And this is just hands down the best way to study the channel system that I've ever come across. And this is one of our teachers. This is a whole nother story. It's a pretty crazy story about our teacher Li Ding, who is a Chinese guy. He ended up in Argentina. We chased him all around the world trying to find him. And he developed this way of studying the channels through Qigong, which is just wonderful. So I had an obligation to kind of, again, pass on the stuff that he had left us. So this is the program we're working on. It's a sort of theoretical framework aimed at both at lay people, but also at people who are interested in, professional Chinese medicine people could easily be interested in it. But it's not a clinical course. It's about the ideas and the thinking of the Neijing and put into practice through physical culture. Specifically this Qigong, which is called the Jinglo Qigong.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're teaching some craft.
I'm teaching some craft, absolutely. And I'm trying to tell a story from the Neijing that will influence people's sort of cultural mindset. That's
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to have some links on the show notes page for folks who will be interested in that.
Excellent. Yeah.
Great. Ethan, this has been delightful.
Yes, it's been totally fun. Totally fun.
Thank you so much for your time today and for the reminder about this work being craft. That just so resonates with me. And there have been so many times in the years that I've practiced where I've felt like I maybe wasn't taking it seriously enough. I wasn't scholarly enough, or I didn't have all the cognitive models down that well. And the truth is, I think there's an aspect of craft of doing that teapot again and again and again, feeling it, seeing what happens, allowing that to also teach. Sometimes at points it's been a very lonely journey for me because, in some ways we very much admire the scholars and we admire those really very clear cognitive models. But I found myself lacking in that. And there's this other thing that's called my attention, and you've spoken to that a bit today, so I appreciate that. It's helpful to hear it reflected back.
Cool. Well, I mean, this is that's why I came up, because I have a similar kind of process in which in recent years I realized, this is the way I see it, and I'm very happy about seeing it that way.
Wonderful. I'm so glad you're sharing it.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah.
Until next time then.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been fun.
All right.
Well, friends, that wraps up today's conversation with Ethan. Sometimes I hear things that guests say, and while it's not something I directly thought about, it lands with a sense of, oh, yes, that's true. That happened for me when we talked about medicine, not as a theory to memorize, but as a craft to live. The Neijing, it isn't just a classical text, it's a set of principles that find their way through our hands, our attention, and the repetition of daily practice. Ethan spoke of unwinding knots, following the qi, and letting the body show us what it needs, rather than us imposing our own ideas on it. Such a delicious paradox that while the world of medicine is about finding answers, the heart of clinical practice, it's less about flow-charted diagnosis and more about listening through touch, letting the hands lead, and then the attention follow. I especially appreciate his image of medicine as pottery, shaping the same form again and again, each time refining it, each time uncovering something more. That's the quiet work of craft. It's not flashy, it's not quick, but it's steady and it's enduringly inquisitive. Old books of any tradition so easily get venerated as something special, something a bit divine, and often not so easy to comprehend by your average person. I like the idea of medicine as craft, and books like the Neijing, seeing them as a guide. And while it can be read in a scholarly fashion, it can also serve as a how-to DIY guide that you can get your hands around. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.